Hey, everybody, welcome back. Given in our last lecture, we talked about how important productivity is to economic growth. We want to focus in on that a little bit today. So, we're going to describe the impact of productivity changes in the economy. So, productivity is simply defined as output divided by input, the average output per unit of input. Example given here is productivity of labor is the amount of output divided by the hours worked. So in this case, we could divide the number of cars divided by the number of workers. Uh, this shows productivity, labor productivity in the United States. You see two different historical trend lines. You can see one from kind of 1973, uh, then through here, and then a trend line that goes 1993 and on. And you can see the big fundamental shift of productivity is 1995, and that's the age of the internet and email, and how important that has been to productivity in the United States and all over the world. This shows non farm labor productivity, and you can see percent change from the previous quarter, and you can see it's not stable. It changes and moves kind of all the time. And that's why we look at our trend line. You can kind of see the red line, the ups and downs, but we look at the trends to kind of overall analyze what's happening. We can increase output using the same or even fewer inputs if we can raise productivity. So here's a table that I really like to highlight why does it matter. So you see in the beginning situation, labor costs $200. It's 20 hours at $10 an hour, $200. Other costs are going to stay constant throughout this. We have a $150 profit, so price per unit would be $1,000. Well, let's say there's an increase in productivity, so it doubles the amount of output per worker. So now I could pay my workers double because now we only need 10 hours to produce what we were producing before. $20 an hour times 10 hours, it stays at 200. $650 here, still $150 profit. Boom, $1,000. Option B, I can keep worker hours the same. I can pay them the same. Now I could increase my profit by $100. Still get that $1,000 price. Third option, if I keep price the same, keep my profit the same, I could lower prices for consumers. Or option D, we could do some combination of each. I could increase the pay for my workers, I increase my profit, and lower prices. All of these are great things that we want to see happen. So, the benefits, like I just said, we can have lower prices, we can have higher profits and or higher wages. All of those are good things in the economy and we want to see them all happen. Problems with lower productivity are the exact opposite. There can be higher prices, lower profits, and or lower wages. There can be lower real GDP per person, and that could lower our standard of living. So, what factors contribute to increases in productivity? What's going to increase our workers or our productivity? So, there are a few of them that we're going to talk through: technological advance, amount of capital each worker has to work with, education and training, economies of scale, and resource allocation. So, the first one is by far the biggest impact. It's technology. This accounts for 40% of productivity growth. The more technology we have and the better technology we have, typically the more we're able to produce, and that's going to make us better off. Technological advance has been rapid and profound, especially in the past 20, 30, 40 years. It's really increased since 1995, as we saw in our earlier graph. Most recent technological advances exploded in biotech and medicine areas, wireless communication, computers, and those sorts of things. Second major contributor is the quantity of capital. This is about 30% of productivity growth. How much capital do we have available? How many machines and equipment and factories do we have to help us produce? Some capital substitutes for labor, when you think of machinery in car plants that have taken jobs over for labor, most of it's complementary to labor, which means that it helps us produce more. A key determinant is the amount of capital goods available per worker. I think about teaching. When I was in school, sitting in those desks that you did, um, our teacher had an overhead projector and a pen and a screen that pulled down. Now, classrooms are outfitted with smart boards and computers and projectors and all sorts of things. Public investment in US infrastructure has also grown. The better our infrastructure is, typically the better off we are. When you think of infrastructure of highways, bridges, public transit, but think about it, just the better our roads are, the easier it is to get supplies to produce, which means there are less work stoppages, and that helps us grow. Investments in new highways matter. Say you put in this new road here, all of this area opens up, and you're going to see people uh, creating businesses there with easy access to transportation. And when governments do build new roads and new highways, we do tend to see more investment of industrial parks. Economies of scale are reductions in per unit production costs that result from increased output levels. This one was always hard for me to understand, but I tend to think of it this way. Right before you, you can see a picture of a dam, a hydroelectric dam. And this is the quintessential example of an economy of scale. How much do you think it costs to build a hydroelectric dam? Millions? Billions? All of that money spent means the very first unit of electricity that gets pushed out cost, let's just say a hydroelectric dam costs $1 billion. That first unit of electricity costs $1 billion to produce. The second unit would be $500 million. In the third unit, half of that. And every unit that gets produced is costing us less and less. But that first unit costs a ton to produce. And that's what an economy of scale is. This is about 8% of productivity growth. These are markets that increase in size over time, and they allow firms to achieve production that is greater with the greater size. Economies of scale help us earn profits on investments. A large manufacturer of autos can use assembly lines and computerization, and smaller producers can't. So, economies of scale are going to give us greater real GDP and thus leading to growth. Education and training. This is all about the human capital. We know the more educated the populace is, the better producers they are. And this is why we see businesses do on the job training, uh, pay for some of your education. If we can have all the technology in the world and all of the um, capital in the world, but the better our humans are at understanding it and using it, the better off we're going to be. This is about 15% of productivity growth. One of the big things here you can see over time throughout 1960 to 2009, the light green is how many people graduated from college or had higher degrees than that. And you can see we're just under 30%. High school, just over 80%. By 2009, in 1960, it was less than 10% and just around 40%. We have put a lot into education and trying to educate the populace to make them better workers. Improved resource allocation. One of the things that helps productivity is if we move people from low productivity jobs to high productivity jobs. In this, kind of looking at our economy as a whole, we used to be an agricultural economy. Agriculture is a low productivity job. There's only so much you can grow in the space given, and it's hard to do more than that. You're restricted by land, you're restricted by weather. Then we kind of moved to a manufacturing society where productivity was much higher. We were able to mass produce things. And now we've moved to a technology based society where productivity is even higher. So, if we want to see more productivity, moving people from low productivity jobs to high productivity jobs is going to make a difference. In our case, it's about 8%. So, our productivity in the US has increased. As a result of this, we also see discrimination in education and labor markets that used to deter women minorities from entering high productivity jobs. There's been a decline in that discrimination over time, which has led to another increase in productivity. And then we also have tariffs and import quotas, and those barriers that are based on trade, um, that are placed on trade, tend to make resources go towards unproductive things. If our tariffs get too high on steel coming in from China, we're going to find it necessary to make more steel in the United States. And maybe that's not what we want our resources to be doing. We'd rather have our resources going towards producing biotechnology. But if tariffs get too high, that's what's going to happen. There's some great videos on here that you can watch. Feel free to post questions.